Hi, I'm Jess, and welcome to another episode of Dose of Pharma. Today we are joined by Ariba, who is a medical student at Monash, and we'll be discussing studying. To begin, Ariba, would you be able to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. My name is Ariba. I'm a second year postgrad medical student at Monash. I did my undergrad in biomedical science, also at Monash. I run two Instagram pages, one focused on productivity and one on positivity, which are two things that I feel quite passionate about and I'm always trying to better myself in. And yeah, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. And yeah, the Instagram pages are fantastic, and everybody listening should go check those out. And today we're going to be focusing more on the productivity side of that and study tips and tricks. So to start off, many students start university and they're pretty unsure about what studying even looks like, especially at a university level. It's rather different than back in high school. So can you give us an overview of the basic steps involved in studying and retaining the content you learn?
Yeah, sure. I think it's firstly important to just acknowledge that there is no real one-size-fits-all approach to studying. I think that everyone comes from different backgrounds and has different strengths and weaknesses, and that should be incorporated into one's individualized study routine. I can chat about what my study routine looked like and what that meant for me, but I guess it's just worth noting that that might not work for everyone else, and that's perfectly okay. It's not a commentary on someone not being good at studying. It's more just that people have different strengths and weaknesses. For me personally, I think that studying and retaining content is obviously a big part of what I have to do every day. So I think it's important to firstly just know what your expectations are. So that can kind of manifest itself in different forms. It could be some lecturers like to provide a set of learning objectives or give an overview of what is actually expected, or they might actually outright tell you that this is going to be assessed. So I think it's just important to be able to organize that and know exactly what's expected of you, so you're not overshooting or undershooting in terms of knowing what to go for. I think that was probably something in retrospect I struggled with in the past when I started to study. So I think that would be my first key step. From there onwards, I think it's a matter of just trying to be able to be consistent person. It's really hard to pick up things immediately, and I'm not one of those talented, gifted people who pick up things on their first go. I need to repeat it continuously and make mistakes along the way and just kind of go with the flow like that. So I think that's quite important to just be consistent. And lastly, I think it's important to also acknowledge that mistakes occur across the studying process. I wish it was seamless, but it's never like that. You will probably make mistakes and you will probably, get stuck, lost, confused. We've all kind of been there, and I think it's important to also just acknowledge that that's human, that's perfectly fine, and have mechanisms in place to just let yourself bounce back if that does happen to happen. Yeah, I think that's probably my three-step approach. Prepare in advance, consistency, and also just acknowledge that sometimes life gets in the way and we're only human.
Yeah, it's definitely very hard to realize that it's okay to make mistakes, and you're definitely not the only person. That literally everybody is doing that.
Yeah.
And definitely it's hard not to feel like an imposter at a university level when you are making those mistakes. And I know that's something like you've discussed on your Instagram page about dealing with imposter syndrome.
Yeah. I feel like I kind of am the poster child of imposter syndrome. I think the more I talk about it with people, the more I find that everyone else can relate to that to a great extent. I don't know if that's sad or if that's a good thing, but I think it's just something to take comfort in, knowing that you're not alone in feeling in that way. And I think that's kind of helped me out, at least in my own journey. But imposter syndrome is so common. I think especially in this area and in STEM too, I'd say.
Yeah. And the consistency as well is something I'm realizing more and more is one of the most important things with learning anything and doing anything with university or outside of university. it's not so much about like being able to perform every time to that super high standard, but like
Yeah,
on those days when you don't feel like doing anything, just doing something.
yeah,
And
exactly.
it's better than like, yeah, just not doing anything at all. And just doing that every day is what makes like you be able to achieve those goals.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, it
There's
just
a
took me years to realize how important it was just like to be consistent.
For sure. There's this really good quote that I really resonate with. That's something along the lines of like anything worth doing is worth being done fully. And I feel like that's so relevant in studying that it's not going to always happen on your first go. And that's perfectly fine. But I think as long as you kind of stay resilient, as hard as it is at times, and push through it, and like you said, like even just 5 minutes is better than 0 minutes, and keep kind of soldiering on. The effects and the circumstances, and I think just the outcomes at the end of the day, they do speak for themselves. And yeah, consistency is super important. I'm still working on it myself.
Yeah, same. Yeah, that's such a good quote to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Do you have any more specific techniques that you find effective for like summarizing and memorizing information as a STEM student?
Yeah, plenty of them. I think, like I said, I did my undergrad in Pharma, and I think over the years I tried quite a few techniques and found some that worked for me, and some that in retrospect I probably would have like improved on. So I don't think I have a perfect system worked out yet. I feel as though it's definitely a lot better than what it initially was. I think initially, particularly like in my first couple of years in biomed, it was quite inefficient and timeful, where essentially what my process was would be like watching lecture recordings and kind of painstakingly writing down every single word the lecturer said word for word, because I was really, I think, anxious about the fact of missing out like this one word. And if I miss that out, that one word's going to pop up on that quiz and it's going to be like a downward slope from there. So I think it was quite a like labor intensive process because I'd constantly just rewind and write down that one word in that particular way. And it was not too effective. I also found that the way that I used to structure my notes is quite perfectionistic, and I think my focus was much more on the aestheticness of it as opposed to the functionality. So I would spend ages trying to come up with pretty pictures and nice diagrams, and it looked nice, but I just felt like I wasn't actually retaining much at the end of the day. And in any kind of STEM subject, where it's incredibly content heavy, it's not going to be too feasible at the end of the day. I think currently the types of techniques that I try to embed that I think have been much more helpful as a STEM student would be implementing more active recall into my study. So thank you. Some people know it, some people love it, some people don't really love it. But it's that like that flashcard kind of app. I did try that. It wasn't personally my cup of tea, I think mostly because I'm not too tech savvy, but the general principles of it embed active recall and space repetition, where essentially you're given a question, you're forced to kind of think through the answer on the top of your head without referring to any notes or resources. And Anki is good in the sense that it also embeds spaced repetition into it. So depending on how you go in answering those questions, they will kind of phase that question back to you over a certain period of time, and it's kind of based off, I think, the curve of forgetting or the learning curve. I can't remember what that was called, but it's like a psychological concept. So it's quite like evidence-based. I think Anki is probably not my cup of tea. What I try and do instead is still kind of incorporate the premise of Anki just into my note-taking approach, where essentially when I write down notes nowadays, I tend to write it down as a question. So instead of just writing down paragraphs of, like, let's say, the management of asthma, I would probably more just write it down as what is the management of asthma, and then I would hide the notes. So when I'm actually reviewing it, I am forced to think about what the answer to the question is as opposed to passively absorbing it. And I think that shift from passive absorption of notes to more active recall has been, definitely monumental in, like studying, and particularly today, just because there's a lot more content I find in postgrad compared to undergrad to navigate that. I guess other techniques that have been quite helpful for me is also just teaching. I think that teaching is pretty well supported as well by the literature to have a pretty good retention rate in terms of if you teach a concept to someone, you will remember it better. I think it's something that I try to implement to a certain extent where I'll try and teach a concept or just explain it in simple terms. And I think it's a good way to test in any like STEM subject, whether you understand the concept, because the process of detechnicalization is a good way to actually assess whether you know a complex subject well enough to decomplexify it. I don't know if that's a word, but decomplexify the subject as much as you can. But yeah, I think those are a couple from the top of my head.
Yeah, they're all very good techniques. I never even thought of like the question one before. And that sounds
Yeah,
like a fantastic way to, yeah, make it more active when you're going over your notes. And
yeah,
that's definitely something, yeah, I think would be worth implementing.
yeah, no, it's been a
Yeah,
huge change for me. And I think the like program that I use for it is something called Notion. I'm not too sure if you've heard of it,
yeah, I've
but
heard of this.
yeah,
Yeah.
Notion. I could talk all day about Notion, but Notion's really game changing. It's a personalized workspace, so you can kind of like change it around to your liking. But there's a feature on Notion that has a toggle function. So from there, you can kind of like hide your notes there, and it just shows the question. So it's pretty nice because I can just ask you the question, but then I can press a button, and then the answer to the question or like the notes about it would pop up. So it's actually like hidden. And I'm not tempted to like
Yeah, yeah.
like that.
Oh, that's always the temptation when like
Yeah,
testing
always.
yourself is to like refer to your notes.
Yeah, I know this. I know this. Yeah, like I'm so guilty of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I have also used Anki and I did find that useful. But I do
Yeah,
understand what you're saying about it being a bit like needing to understand the technology because it isn't
yeah,
always very straightforward how to use it.
yeah. It's a bit of a steep learning curve. I don't think I've fully like combated that learning curve myself because it's why I don't really use it too much today. But I think
Yeah.
when I did get around it, and I think yeah, when I did learn how to use it once upon a time, it was actually really helpful. And I found that the things that I learned from Anki, like it's kind of drilled into my subconscious. So I think it's probably one of those things that might be worth investing into if you're looking for like long-term recall or long-term retainment of
Yeah.
content.
Yeah. And the last one
Yeah,
as well, like teaching other people definitely helps. And it's always just
yeah,
like going around to my family members and
yeah.
being like this concept you have no idea about.
Always, yeah. My family is for
Yeah.
me.
And it's like there'll be words you like use that you don't even realize are like technical words. And they'll be like,
Yeah,
what's that? And I'm like, oh,
and it just opens a whole new can of
yeah.
worms. But it's a good kind of educational kind of worms, and
Yeah.
it's definitely helpful.
Often the hardest part about studying and using these techniques is even getting started in the first place. Like you have all these techniques in place, but then you
Yeah.
don't have the motivation to actually use them. So, what are your like first steps in starting work and like remaining motivated to keep working?
Yeah. I'm not an expert in this myself. Motivation is really fickle, isn't it? I just feel like sometimes it's so low and it's really hard to get a start. I'm definitely kind of experiencing that myself and have had multiple incidences this year and just throughout my whole academic life where I've kind of struggled with motivation. I think it's just important to acknowledge that again. It's not necessarily like a you thing or it's not a commentary on yourself. Another kind of good quote that just sticks to mind and something that I do tell myself when I struggle with staying motivated is to kind of stick to discipline more than motivation. And the quote that comes to mind is the idea that discipline now is empathy for your future self. So in other words, I just tell myself that if I can get this done today, it's going to mean that me from next week is going to be a bit less stressed out. Or if I can get just 5 minutes of this done, that's 5 minutes less tomorrow. And it's kind of just practicing, like I try and frame it in a way where I think if I do it now or make a start now, be empathetic to myself in the future because it's less for myself in the future to handle. And that's surprisingly worked pretty well. It doesn't have a perfect success rate. There's some days where that's still not enough, but I think it's made substantial improvements in how I am able to sometimes just crack on even if I'm low on motivation. where even if like motivation isn't the driving force, it's more discipline that gets me going. But I think things that help me to start work is probably to break down big daunting tasks into smaller digestible chunks. Because I feel like one of the biggest barriers for me to start work is I just think to myself, oh, that's too big of a task. I don't know where to start it. Like, what do I do? What does this involve? So I feel like when I have something like an assignment that I need to get done, I like to break it down into smaller chunks in my to-do list. So like, let's say it's a report or something like that, breaking it down into abstract, intro, methods, results, discussion, breaking that down even further and just saying in my intro, I want one sentence on this, one sentence of that, in my methodology, just stating it like that. It seems silly, but it just makes scary big tasks seem a little less scary when I know exactly what it entails and that this huge mountain is just made of small steps. And if I can just get a few steps done, that's progress. That's kind of like, I feel like a big part of it is just mentality. I don't think I have the best mentality at times, so I need to continuously reassure myself. And these are like sentiments that really help me when I struggle with remaining motivated, which unfortunately is quite common. I also think it's just important to acknowledge that sometimes it's not going to happen. You're not going to get work done today, and that's completely okay. I think it's probably good to also like remind yourself that if that's the case, it might be good to take a step back and probably ask yourself if something is going on, if there's something underlying it. Burnout is really common and it's incredibly prevalent, especially amongst people in STEM. So I think it's just important to kind of maintain a fine balance between staying motivated, getting work done, being productive, but also taking care of your health, physical, mental, social, because that's more important, I would argue, at the end of the day, particularly mental health as well.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I love the highlighting the fact that, yeah, we do need to take care of ourselves because that's so easy to forget, especially when being like, I should be doing this work. Why don't I feel like doing this? I need to do this.
Yeah.
But then like, yeah, not wanting to do that. Yeah, and being hard on yourself for not wanting to do that is like, yeah, that's not good. And I like the idea of being able to, yeah, take a step back and be like, okay, so why do I feel like this? And like making sure, yeah, that everything's all right. Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
No, definitely like breaking things down into smaller chunks definitely helps so much because it's so much less intimidating to be like, okay, I just need to write an introduction or an abstract rather than being like, okay, I've got this whole report I need to write. I need it done by next week. But it's like, okay, today I just need to do this tiny part and I can get that done is so much more achievable.
For sure. I think it makes it so much more digestible to manage.
Yeah.
And I think also just like the process of writing it down makes me like realize that it's probably not as big of a mammoth task, or the way that I'm kind of building it up in my head versus what it actually entails are two substantially different things. I think in my head, I think that it's like a mountain of a task. I'm never going to get it done. It's beyond my means. But I think when I write it down, I think, oh yeah, I'm like, I got this. Like, it's going to be all right. So I feel as though like it just kind of, it's a bit of a reality check. It kind of grounds me. And I think the process of just ticking things off a to-do list is incredibly rewarding and a strangely like big motivator for me as well.
Yeah. Yeah, you can see that you're achieving stuff and you're thinking about what you have done as well, not just what you have left to do.
Yeah, like I think I'm just addicted to the feeling of just crossing things off my list. It's a really satisfying feeling. And I think sometimes that's what gets me going and just pushes me to keep going through things.
You're much nicer to your future self than I am, though. I have a really bad habit of being like, oh, that's future me's problem. I don't have to worry about that right now. And I definitely prefer your mindset for that and probably need to start trying to implement that a little bit more in my life.
It can easily backfire. And I can just be like, oh, but future me would be happy if I take a rest tonight or just sleep tonight. So like it goes both ways. Like sometimes it backfires, sometimes it works, but I just think practicing empathy and putting yourself first is still really important, and it's something that doesn't get talked about much, I think, in education, about like how much of an impact it can have detrimentally on our health. So it's just good to make sure that you actively embed it and take tangible steps to put yourself first.
Yeah, yeah. And you're definitely better off taking that time to put yourself first and recharging and feeling better, because then you can do work to a higher standard after that than just trying to push through and producing very terrible results.
Exactly. Like it's kind of like the phone battery analogy. I think something along the lines of that like if you're running low on battery, like it's better to recharge as opposed to like push yourself down to zero.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
It's just good to rest. Rest isn't something that's earned.
Yeah, I think that's definitely some great advice that our listeners can go away with, that they need to take care of themselves as well as implement all this productivity and motivational advice.
Definitely.
But the priority is look after yourself.
For sure, 100%.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining today and giving all this great advice and answering all my questions. Yeah, so would you like to shout out your Instagram handles so then everyone can go check those out?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, just thank you so much for having me. I don't know like if I've said anything that's helpful, but I do hope that someone can benefit from it. That would make me super happy. My Instagram handles are choosing productivity as well as choosing positivity, both on Instagram. If you're on it, just shoot me a message, say hi. I don't bite. It would be lovely to just have someone reach out and talk.
Thank you for that. And people can find Dose of Pharma on Spotify and Google Podcasts and on YouTube. So thank you for that. Dose of Pharma acknowledges the traditional custodians of the various lands throughout Australia on which we connect today, and pays respect to elders past, present, and future.